In 1993, on a remote spit of land jutting into the Arctic Ocean, Russian geologist Sergei Vartanyan was doing something most people would consider monumentally tedious. He was sifting through sediment cores pulled from Wrangel Island, a desolate chunk of tundra about the size of Delaware, sitting roughly 87 miles off the coast of Siberia. The island is brutal. Howling winds, 9 months of winter, polar bears. Not exactly prime real estate. But Vartanyan wasn't there for the scenery. He was there because of bones. Wrangel Island is littered with mammoth remains. Tusks, teeth, femurs the size of baseball bats. And when Vartanyan started carbon dating these fossils, something stopped him cold. The bones were young, really young. Now, when I say young in geological terms, I mean about 4,000 years old, which might not sound young to you. But here's the thing. Everywhere else on Earth, mammoths had been extinct for nearly 6,000 years by that point. The last mammoths on the mainland, Siberia, North America, Europe, they all died out around 10,000 years ago, right as the Ice Age was ending and humans were figuring out agriculture. But on this frozen island, completely isolated from the rest of the world, a small population of woolly mammoths kept living. And living. And living. They survived into the age of the pyramids. When Stonehenge was being built, there were still mammoths walking the earth. When the ancient Sumerians were inventing writing, mammoths were grazing on Wrangel Island. And then, sometime around 1650 BCE, the last mammoth died. So here's the question that's haunted paleontologists ever since. What happened? Why did a species that survived for millions of years, that weathered ice ages and droughts and predators, suddenly vanish from an island where they'd been thriving for thousands of years after the rest of their kind disappeared? The answer is far more complicated and far more tragic than you might think. So let's start with what we know about woolly mammoths. Because to understand their extinction, you first have to understand just how phenomenally successful these animals were. Woolly mammoths weren't some evolutionary dead end or niche species clinging to survival. They were one of the most widespread and dominant herbivores of the Pleistocene epoch. We're talking about an animal that roamed across 3 continents, North America, Europe, and Asia, for roughly 400,000 years. For context, modern humans, Homo sapiens, have only been around for about 300,000 years. Mammoths outlasted us by 100 millennia. They survived multiple glacial periods, massive climate swings, volcanic eruptions, and the arrival of human hunters armed with spears and fire. And they didn't just survive, they thrived. Picture this. During the last ice age, roughly 20,000 years ago, much of the northern hemisphere was covered by something called the Mammoth Steppe. This wasn't the tundra you see in Siberia today. Barren, frozen, lifeless. This was a vast grassland ecosystem stretching from Spain to Canada, fed by cold, dry winds and teeming with life. Grasses, sedges, wildflowers. Endless rolling plains that supported not just mammoths, but woolly rhinoceroses, steppe bison, musk oxen, cave lions, giant ground sloths, and saber-toothed cats. It was one of the most productive ecosystems the planet has ever seen. And at the center of it all were the mammoths. Now here's what I find fascinating. Mammoths weren't just living on this steppe, they were shaping it. These animals were ecosystem engineers. They knocked down trees, trampled shrubs, spread seeds through their dung, and maintained the grasslands through their feeding behavior. Without mammoths, the mammoth steppe as we know it wouldn't have existed. But then, starting around 14,000 years ago, something changed. The Earth began warming. The glaciers started retreating, and the Mammoth Steppe began to collapse. As temperatures rose, the cold, dry grasslands gave way to forests, wetlands, and tundra. The plants mammoths depended on, grasses adapted to cold, dry conditions, began disappearing, replaced by mosses, shrubs, and trees that mammoths couldn't digest as efficiently. So here's where most people assume the story ends. Climate change killed the mammoths. Case closed. But that's not what happened. Because if climate alone was the killer, then mammoths should have gone extinct everywhere at the same time, right as the Ice Age ended. They didn't. Instead, mammoth populations collapsed in stages, different regions at different times. Some populations held on longer than others, and a few, like the ones on Wrangel Island, survived for thousands of years after the climate had already changed. Which brings us to the real question. If it wasn't just climate change, then what actually killed the mammoths? Around the same time the Earth started warming, another factor entered the equation. Us. Modern humans arrived in Siberia roughly 45,000 years ago. We reached North America somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000 years ago. The exact timing is still debated. And everywhere humans showed up, megafauna started disappearing. Now, before we go further, let me be clear about something. The role of humans in mammoth extinction is one of the most contentious debates in paleontology. Some scientists argue humans were the primary cause. Others say climate was the main driver, and humans just delivered the final blow. Still others think it was pure coincidence. But here's what we know for certain. Archaeological sites across Europe, Asia, and North America show clear evidence of mammoth hunting. Spear points embedded in mammoth bones, butchery marks, entire structures built from mammoth tusks and bones. Ancient humans didn't just hunt mammoths occasionally, they depended on them. And this is where Wrangel Island becomes so important. Because here's the thing about Wrangel Island. It's isolated, really isolated. During the last ice age, when sea levels were lower, Wrangel was connected to the Siberian mainland by a land bridge. Mammoths walked across. But around 12,000 years ago, as the glaciers melted and sea levels rose, that land bridge disappeared. Wrangel became an island, and the mammoths on it became cut off from the rest of the world. No humans reached Wrangel Island during the time mammoths lived there. Archaeological surveys have found zero evidence of human presence on the island before about 3,700 years ago, roughly 300 years after the last mammoths died. So this gives us a natural experiment, an isolated mammoth population living on an island with no human hunters. If humans were the main cause of extinction, these mammoths should have survived indefinitely, right? They didn't. Which means something else was happening. Something far more insidious than climate change or hunting pressure alone. All right, so to understand what actually killed the last mammoths, we need to understand what mammoths were, how they lived, what they ate, how they reproduced, and most importantly, what happens when you trap a large animal population on a small island for thousands of years? Let's start with the basics. Woolly mammoths were roughly the size of modern African elephants, though the Wrangel Island population was smaller. We'll get to why in a minute. Adult males stood about 9 to 11 feet tall at the shoulder and weighed somewhere between 6 and 8 tons. Females were smaller, usually around 7 to 9 feet tall. But the size isn't what made them remarkable. It was their adaptations. First, the fur. Mammoths were covered in 2 layers of hair, a dense undercoat of fine wool for insulation, and an outer layer of coarse guard hairs that could grow up to 3 feet long. This double-layer system trapped air and kept them warm, even in temperatures that would kill an unprotected elephant in arrows. And here's what's wild. We know this because scientists have found frozen mammoth carcasses preserved in Siberian permafrost with their fur completely intact. We're talking about animals that died 40,000 years ago, and you can still see individual hairs. Second, the ears. Unlike African elephants with their huge heat-radiating ears, mammoth ears were tiny, only about a foot long. Less surface area means less heat loss. Same reason their tails were short and stumpy compared to modern elephants. Third, the fat. Mammoths had a thick layer of subcutaneous fat, up to 4 inches thick in some places, that acted as both insulation and an energy reserve. During the brutal Siberian winters, when food was scarce, they could metabolize this fat to survive. And then there were the tusks. Mammoth tusks were absurdly large. Males could grow tusks up to 15 feet long, curved in dramatic spirals that sometimes crossed over each other. These weren't just for show. Mammoths used their tusks to scrape away snow to reach vegetation underneath, to strip bark from trees, and during mating season, males used them to fight each other for dominance. Think about that for a second. These animals were carrying around 2 curved ivory spears on their face, each weighing hundreds of pounds, and they used them like shovels. So here's a question. What does an 8-ton animal living in one of the harshest environments on Earth actually eat? The answer is a staggering amount of vegetation. Scientists estimate that an adult mammoth needed to consume roughly 400 to 600 pounds of plant matter every single day. For context, that's like eating your body weight in salad every week. And we're not talking about high-quality forage here. This was tough, fibrous grasses, sedges, herbs, and occasional woody browse. Here's how it worked. Mammoths had 6 sets of molars throughout their lifetime, but only 1 set was active at a time. As each set wore down from grinding tough vegetation, it would be replaced by a new set that moved forward from the back of the jaw. This conveyor belt system meant mammoths could process enormous amounts of plant material without their teeth failing. But here's the catch. Once the 6th set wore down, that was it. No more teeth. And for a mammoth, losing your last set of molars was essentially a death sentence. You couldn't eat. You starved. Most mammoths lived to be about 60 years old, and tooth wear was one of the primary factors limiting their lifespan. Now remember this detail about their teeth and diet, because it becomes critically important when we talk about what happened on Wrangel Island. Let's talk about mammoth reproduction, because this is where things start to get mathematically grim. Female mammoths reach sexual maturity around 10 to 12 years old. Males matured slightly later, around 15 years old, though they usually didn't get to breed until they were large and strong enough to compete with other males, often not until their 20s or 30s. Gestation lasted about 22 months, nearly 2 years. After birth, calves stayed with their mothers for several years, nursing and learning survival skills. And like modern elephants, mammoths probably had long intervals between births, typically giving birth to a single calf every 4 to 6 years. So let's do the math. A female mammoth lives to be 60. She reaches maturity at 10. She gives birth every 5 years. That means, over her entire lifetime, she might produce about 10 calves, maybe fewer. That's an incredibly slow reproductive rate. For large mammals, slow reproduction isn't necessarily a problem, as long as adult survival rates are high. African elephants today reproduce slowly, But they're not endangered because most adults survive to old age, and populations remain stable or grow. But when you introduce mortality pressures, hunting, disease, environmental stress, slow reproduction becomes a critical vulnerability. Which brings us to a concept that's going to become very important: minimum viable population. Here's where it gets interesting, and by interesting, I mean tragic. When the mammoths on Wrangel Island became isolated around 12,000 years ago, the population probably numbered somewhere between 500 and 1,000 individuals. Now that might sound like a lot, but for a large mammal with slow reproduction, it's dangerously small. Population geneticists have a term for this: minimum viable population, or MVP. It's the smallest population size at which a species can survive long-term without running into genetic problems or demographic collapse. For large mammals, the MVP is usually estimated at around 5,000 individuals. The Wrangel mammoths were an order of magnitude below that threshold. And this is where small populations run into big problems. Let me walk you through what happens. First problem: inbreeding. In large populations, individuals mate with unrelated partners, mixing genes and maintaining genetic diversity. But in small populations, especially isolated ones, you inevitably start mating with relatives, cousins, siblings, even parents and offspring, though this is rarer in mammals with extended parental care. And here's why that matters. Every organism carries some harmful recessive mutations, genetic typos that don't cause problems as long as you only have one copy. But when you inbreed, you dramatically increase the chance that both parents pass on the same harmful mutation to their offspring. The result? Increased rates of birth defects, lower fertility, weaker immune systems, higher infant mortality, reduced lifespan. And we know this happened to the Wrangel mammoths because scientists have sequenced their DNA. In 2017, researchers published a study comparing the genomes of mammoths from different time periods. They found that the Wrangel Island mammoths showed clear signs of inbreeding and genetic deterioration. They'd lost genetic diversity. They'd accumulated harmful mutations. And some of these mutations directly affected their ability to smell, process proteins, and respond to environmental stress. In other words, the Wrangel mammoths were genetically compromised. But genetics alone wasn't enough to doom them. There was another factor at play. Remember how I said mammoths were ecosystem engineers? That they maintained the grasslands they depended on? Well, here's the problem. Wrangel Island is tiny, only about 2,900 square miles. And as the climate warmed after the Ice Age, even that small island began changing. The cold, dry grasslands that mammoths preferred started giving way to tundra vegetation, mosses, lichens, low shrubs, the kinds of plants mammoths had trouble digesting. The kinds of plants that didn't provide enough nutrition to sustain an 8-ton body. And here's where things get circular. Fewer mammoths meant less grazing pressure. Less grazing pressure meant more shrubs and trees. More shrubs and trees meant less grass. Less grass meant even fewer mammoths could survive. It was a feedback loop. And it was tightening. So now imagine you're a Wrangel Island mammoth around 2000 BCE. Your population has been declining for thousands of years. Your island is changing. Food is getting scarcer. Your genes are compromised from generations of inbreeding. And then something happens. Maybe a harsh winter, maybe a summer drought, maybe a disease outbreak. By itself, none of these events would be catastrophic. But for a population that's already weakened, already struggling, It's the final blow. Birth rates drop. Infant mortality spikes. Adults start dying younger. The population shrinks further. Genetic diversity plummets. And suddenly, you hit a threshold. A point of no return. Population biologists call this an extinction vortex. It's when multiple negative factors reinforce each other in a feedback loop, dragging a population toward extinction regardless of external pressures. And once you're in the vortex, there's no escape. So here's what we don't know. We don't know the exact moment the last mammoth died. We don't know if it was male or female, young or old. We don't know if it died of starvation, disease, or simply old age. What we do know is that sometime around 1650 BCE, mammoth populations on Wrangel Island dropped below replacement level and never recovered. The youngest reliably dated mammoth remains from the island are about 3,700 years old. That means the last mammoth on Earth died roughly 3,700 years ago, during the Bronze Age, when Egypt was at the height of its power, when the Minoans were building palaces on Crete, when the first Indo-European peoples were spreading across Europe. Somewhere on a frozen island in the Arctic Ocean, the last representative of a lineage that had survived for 5 million years took its final breath. And then it was gone. So let's step back and look at the bigger picture. Because the extinction of the woolly mammoth isn't just a story about one species. It's a story about what happens when multiple factors converge at exactly the wrong time. The Wrangel Island mammoths teach us something crucial about extinction. It's rarely one single cause. It's almost always a combination of factors: climate change, habitat loss, genetic deterioration, demographic collapse, that creates a cascade of failures. And here's what's sobering about that. We're seeing the same pattern play out today with countless species. Small, isolated populations, shrinking habitats, genetic bottlenecks, rising temperatures. The mammoth extinction wasn't a fluke. It was a preview. Now, let's address the elephant, or mammoth, in the room. Did humans cause mammoth extinction? The answer is complicated. On the mainland, where humans and mammoths coexisted for thousands of years, hunting pressure was almost certainly a major factor. Not necessarily the primary cause, but a significant accelerator of decline. Think about it this way. Mammoth populations were already stressed by climate change and habitat loss. Then humans arrived with sophisticated hunting techniques, spear throwers, fire drives, coordinated group hunts. Even low levels of hunting mortality would be enough to tip the balance. And we know humans were effective mammoth hunters. Archaeological sites show clear evidence of mammoth kill sites, butchery, and utilization of every part of the animal. Ivory, bones, meat, fur, nothing was wasted. But here's the critical thing. Wrangel Island had no human hunters, and the mammoths still went extinct. So while humans may have accelerated mammoth extinction on the mainland, they weren't necessary for extinction to occur. Given enough time and enough environmental stress, the mammoths would have disappeared anyway. It just would have taken longer. The woolly mammoth extinction reveals several uncomfortable truths about how extinction works. First, extinction isn't always fast. The Wrangel mammoths took roughly 8,000 years to go extinct after being isolated on their island. That's not a catastrophic die-off. That's a slow, grinding decline spanning hundreds of generations. Second, once a population drops below a certain threshold, extinction becomes virtually inevitable, even if the immediate threats are removed. the genetic and demographic damage is already done. Third, large animals are especially vulnerable. Their slow reproduction, long generation times, and high resource needs make them less able to adapt to rapid environmental change. And fourth, islands are extinction traps. Small, isolated populations on islands have some of the highest extinction rates of any ecosystem on Earth. So what did the mammoths leave behind? Physically, they left their bones scattered across 3 continents, millions of tusks buried in permafrost, frozen carcasses that occasionally surface when the tundra thaws, ancient cave paintings in France and Spain showing mammoths as they looked in life. But they also left us something more valuable: information. Scientists have sequenced the complete woolly mammoth genome. We know more about mammoth genetics, physiology, and evolution than almost any other extinct animal. We've analyzed their stomach contents to see exactly what they ate. We've studied their teeth to understand their life history. We've examined their bones to track diseases and injuries. And some scientists think we might be able to bring them back. There are currently several projects attempting to resurrect the woolly mammoth through genetic engineering. The idea is to take an Asian elephant, the mammoth's closest living relative, and edit its genome to include mammoth genes for cold adaptation, fur, and fat storage. Some scientists argue this could help restore Arctic ecosystems, that mammoths could knock down trees, maintain grasslands, and even slow permafrost melting by compacting snow in winter. Others say it's hubris, that the Arctic has changed too much, that we'd be creating animals with no natural habitat, that we should focus on saving species that still exist rather than resurrecting ones we already lost. Both sides have valid points, and honestly, the ethical questions here are thorny. But regardless of whether we should bring back mammoths, the fact that we're even discussing it shows how profoundly these animals still capture our imagination. Here's what strikes me most about the mammoth extinction. These animals did everything right. They evolved brilliant adaptations for the Ice Age. They thrived for hundreds of thousands of years. They survived multiple climate swings, volcanic eruptions, and the arrival of human hunters. But evolution doesn't prepare you for every contingency. It doesn't guarantee survival. It just gives you the tools to survive in the environment you evolved for. And when that environment changes faster than you can adapt, all the adaptations in the world won't save you. The Wrangel Island mammoths survived on their isolated refuge for 6,000 years after the rest of their species disappeared. They watched the world change around them. They kept breeding, kept feeding, kept living, even as their population dwindled and their genes deteriorated. And then, one day, there was only one left. And then, there were none. The last woolly mammoth died on Wrangel Island roughly 3,700 years ago. By that point, humans had been farming for thousands of years. We'd built cities, invented writing, developed mathematics and astronomy. We'd spread to every continent except Antarctica. And somewhere in the Arctic, utterly unaware of all of it, a species that had walked the Earth for millions of years simply stopped existing. Their extinction wasn't dramatic. There was no asteroid, no volcanic eruption, no sudden catastrophe. Just a slow, inevitable decline caused by factors they could never have understood or controlled. Climate change, genetic deterioration, demographic collapse, bad luck. The mammoths were gone, and the world moved on without them, leaving only bones, stories, and questions about what we could have done differently, if anything at all. Hey, before you go, I want to mention something quickly. Creating these videos is genuinely a labor of love, but it's also incredibly time-intensive. The research alone for this script took weeks, tracking down studies, verifying facts, building a narrative that's both accurate and engaging. That's why I'm launching channel memberships. If you've enjoyed this video and want to help me create more content like it, deeper research, richer storytelling, better production, please consider joining as a member. You're not just donating, you're giving me the time and resources to keep exploring these incredible stories, and that makes all the difference. So if you believe in this mission, click the join button below. I literally exist because of you. Thank you. And until next time, there's another video here I think you'll love.